What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin with a trash voice today, coming with another box office breakdown, which saw the release of Don't Worry, Darling from Olivia Wilde. This has gotten a lot of controversy around it in the social medias, at least from what I've been told, and the film ended up having a pretty strong opening weekend, making $19.2 million domestically and over $30 million worldwide, whereas The Woman King dropped to second place, but only had a 42% drop in the domestic market, which is actually a pretty strong holdover when you consider that films typically with a north of $50 million to $100 million budgets tend to have much larger drop-offs. And so what this shows is that even though the history is out there and it's very clear that this movie is glossing over some of the darker parts of the history, or at the very least is trying to create a story that's not actually real, meaning that they're trying to act as if it's a conflict in the movie between some of the characters, and yet it is not something that actually happened in the history as far as there being a conflict. These are, again, tribes that, or rather this specific tribe, the Dahomey tribe specifically, would literally conquer the surrounding tribes around them and would cut off the heads of the elderly, would sell, every single person, whether they be man, woman, child, elderly, whatever, into slavery as well. Not just amongst themselves, but also even amongst the Atlantic slave trade. None of that, of course, is going to get a major focus in this movie. And yet, even with all that information, and even with some of the negative social media attention, it seems that the propaganda is working, because The Woman King is still doing well domestically, because that is actually a pretty healthy drop. Not to mention, of course, the fact that this movie still has a ways to go. So even though my projections will indicate this film will be a flop and will lose money, we have to take that with a grain of salt, because this film has yet to release in several international countries, which could end up being its saving grace. It's very similar to the story about what happened with the film by Jordan Peele that just recently came out, right? That movie was able to, rather the film, Nope, it was able to, seemingly be a massive flop, and yet once it came out internationally, it started to make a lot of that ground back, and even though it still was not able quite to get to its break-even point officially at the box office, it was close enough to where anything it makes on 4K or Blu-ray is going to be able to make up for those losses. So anyway, let's go ahead and go into the top 5, though, for the box office this week. Don't Worry, Darling, as I mentioned before, has made $19.2 million. The Woman King, $11.1 million, only a 42% drop. Again, propaganda seems to be working there. Avatar's re-release. That's right, Avatar, everyone's favorite movie. You all know how much I love Avatar. Goodness gracious, I just want this franchise to die already. But this film ended up making $10 million, which if you look at the per theater ratio, this film, even after, having been first released years ago at this point, was still able to do better per theater than Don't Worry, Darling, and even the second weekend of The Woman King. And I would put that up even against the first weekend of The Woman King as well. So again, apparently there are people out there that still want to go see Avatar. And so this is why it's an early indication to me that I think Avatar 2 is going to be huge. I don't think it's going to be as big as the first one was, because I think some people have wised up to say, hey, yeah, you got visual effects, but they've actually kind of been dated at this point, and also your story sucks. Maybe if he's able to actually deliver a competent story this time around, maybe, just maybe, he'll be able to bring some people back around. But again, I think it'll be big, just not as big as before. I could see this being $1 billion to a $1.5 billion film, but really, how big it is going to depend on when we actually start getting some numbers. In the third week of its release, Barbarian has now crossed into a break-even territory, dropping only 26% in its third week of release, making another $4.8 million. 20th Century Studios actually added 550 screens, so the domestic for this film is now at $28 million. Pearl came in at the number 5 spot from A24, dropping only 39% in its second week of release. This is the movie that cost almost nothing to make, and so it was already breaking even after opening weekend. It is now continuing to make more profits. We also saw the release of, or rather, we saw the second weekend of How They Run, 37% drop there. Bullet Train is the one I wanted to get to, though, because with that 29% hold and the fact that it was able to do well internationally, this film, after 8 weeks, has finally been able to not only break even, but is now in the profitability territory, which makes me very happy, because Bullet Train is one of the most entertaining films of this year, up there with Top Gun Maverick. Not as great as Top Gun Maverick, but hey, Top Gun Maverick, after 18 weeks of release, still doing quite well. Kudos to Paramount for continuing to have a massive release. Internationally, Don't Worry, Darling's at $30 million. So as I said, this movie actually is doing much better than I think some people would have suspected it to. I think that the old adage of there being controversy and things like that, and there's no such thing as bad press, might actually be true, because seemingly it has motivated enough people to want to check this movie out. This film has made $30 million, and so it is on a good pace right now. Depending on the second weekend will be a big determining factor, but it's on a good pace to be able to make its money back. Now, as I said with The Woman King, right now internationally, it only has made around $1.3 million as of the recording of this video, making its total at 37.5. Now, some people are going to look at my charting and say, wait a minute, but you're projecting it to lose money. And yes, that is my projection. However, that is, of course, with a caveat. Look at these films, or rather look at these countries where this film has not yet been released. This film has not yet been released in France, Argentina. Some of the bigger countries would be places like India, Germany, the UK. You also have other places like Spain as well, Australia, Hong Kong, Mexico. All of these countries are going to be ones that are going to be able to provide more money to this film that is not being accounted for in my calculations. My calculations only really work and only really are situated for movies that have released day and date the same, or at least in the vast majority of the countries it's going to release in, all at the same time. And so because of that, even though I will say that there's a chance for Woman King to flop, I will say be very careful with any of the people out there who might try to talk about the movie being a massive flop and being a massive failure, because a 42% drop from week 1 to week 2 is actually very strong in the grand scheme of things. And second, this film has yet to release in various international countries, and that is going to international community rather, and that is going to be a massive impact on it in the long run. Also, because I know some people are somewhat interested still in this movie, this is almost comical at this point. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this would be the weekend that the film finally got to $1 billion. And I actually saw a news story going around that it had hit $1 billion. But according to the actual official numbers, and I've checked Box Office Mojo's too, and as I'm recording this video, this is the number that is the highest out of both of those sites, $999.6 million. And so some might say, well, technically it's at $1 billion. It hasn't crossed that threshold yet, and so I will still say nay to that, and the movie sucks, and so it's fun trolling people who still care about that. Anyway, as you can see from these numbers here, we have the second weekend numbers for The Woman King, and so right now, based off the projections of the numbers we have, I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between $53 and $75 million. I would not be surprised if it's closer to 75 to 100 when you take into account the delayed release in other international communities. This film still definitely has a chance of making its money back. Based off of the current numbers, though, it's projected to be somewhere between a $42 and $29 million loss. But as I said, giant caveat with that movie is the fact it still has to release in a wide variety of countries. Don't Worry, Darling's opening to $30 million means that right now it's only around $34.5 million in the red. That film had a production budget of $35 million. It needs to make around $87.5 million worldwide to break even, and I think that it has a good chance of doing so as a pretty strong start at this point in time. As you can see, Pearl is now $2.4 million in the black, right? So continuing to make continuing to make a lot of profit in comparison to the budget for the film. So kudos to them for that. Still no budget being reported for See How They Run, so can't say any projections on that at this point in time. As far as some of the other big films, as I mentioned before, Bullet Train, $230 million worldwide means that this film has doubled what it made in the first 2 weeks of release and is now $3.2 million in the black, which just makes me so incredibly happy. So happy to see this film making money and doing so pretty darn well. And of course, we also have the updated numbers here for, or at least it's not going to be on this chart because of the way that I have my charts laid out, but I can confirm that we do have a pretty massive number. I have it in this tab at least, $1.47 billion for Top Gun Maverick. Will it make it to 1.5? Seems to be slowing down quite a bit at this point. It's been out for 18 weeks, so I'm not surprised by that. The fact that it's even in the conversation is still darn impressive. So those are the movies as they currently stand. What are y'all's thoughts? Do you think Woman King is going to be able to do well enough internationally to make up some of the ground that it has lost? Again, it's not doing terribly domestically based upon the numbers themselves, but it is still in a situation where its break-even point is going to depend upon whether or not the film is able to get audiences to show up in these international communities. Let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, lap that fire button, honestly, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.